Our tests around our cards project are actually turning out pretty well, but there's one last more complicated test I want to put together. So let's check out our deck.go file. Inside of here, you'll remember that we put together a save to file and new deck from file function. So I want to write a test to make sure that we are able to take a deck, save it, and then load it back up. Now doing this is actually going to be just slightly more complicated than you might think. So let's talk about exactly why that is. Okay, so here's one real edge case I want you to consider for just a second. And this is an edge case that's going to lead to a little problem when we start to run our tests. So let's imagine for a second that we write a test that creates a deck, saves it to a file, and maybe we'll say, yeah, it successfully got saved, so file created, everything looks good. And then maybe we attempt to load the file back up to create a deck again. And maybe, for some reason that we can't possibly imagine right now, maybe when we attempt to load the file back up, something goes wrong and our test crashes out entirely. Now, what would be the result of this? Is there anything in here that you think might end up being a little bit weird? Well, when you think about it, remember that we created the file right here. And so if we crash right here, we never really get the opportunity to do any cleanup or remove that temporary testing file that we had just created to test saving a file to the hard drive. So we always need to make sure that whenever we are writing tests with Go, we take care of any cleanup that needs to be done, very manually, because there is absolutely no hand-holding by the Go testing framework. The Go testing framework is not going to detect that you wrote some file and automatically attempt to clean it up for you. You always have to take care of cleanup yourself. So here's what we're going to do to get around this potential issue right here. So here's the function we're going to write to test these save to deck and new deck from file functions. Whenever we execute this test function we're going to put together, the first thing we're going to do is look into our current working directory and delete any files in there with the name of _deck testing. We'll then create a new deck. We'll save it to a file with the name of _deck testing. Let's just throw that in there really quick. We'll then load that deck testing file back up and assert some length to it. And then at the very end of the test, we will again delete any files in the current working directory with the name _deck testing. So as I'm sure you're able to figure out here, essentially we're always going to be writing the same file name to our hard drive. It's always going to have the name of _deck testing. And then every time we start up the test, if we for some reason crashed the last time we tried to run this test, or for any reason whatsoever that _deck testing file is still present, we're going to delete it so our tests run in kind of a clean environment here. So that's how we're going to take care of this cleanup stuff. And then after all of our tests run, we'll again do that cleanup with _deck testing deletion again. So that's the goal. Now, obviously, the first thing we have to figure out here is how we delete a file at all. You know, we know how to create a file, we know how to read from one, but we really don't know how to delete a file. So I think that we again need to check out some of our standard library documentation. So you know what that means. We're going to go back to golang.org and go to the packages section. And then this time we're going to go to the section OS, which we had looked at previously. So here's OS right here. And we're going to look for a very particular function under the index section. So here's index. And the name that we're looking for is remove. So here's remove. So pretty straightforward, remove the named file or directory. All we have to do is pass in the name of the file we want to delete as a string. Now you'll notice that it also returns an error right here. In this case, in the testing environment, we probably should handle the error, but maybe just for this one particular case, we'll just forget it. And we're just going to kind of say, yeah, remove the file, and if anything goes wrong, who cares? Someone else will deal with it. Okay, so let's flip back to our deck test file. At the bottom of the deck test file, we're going to create our new function to test the save to deck and new deck from file functions. So we'll say T test, save to deck, and new deck test from file. And this will be called with a value that we'll refer to as t, and it's of type *testing.t, like so. Now, as you can tell right here, this function name is just ridiculously long, but let me explain the thought process here. So first off, we always name each of the functions inside the file with capital T test to start. And the reason that I'm using such a ridiculously long function name right here is that if my tests ever fail, or if I'm working on some code around, say, this new deck from file function, I want to make sure that after I make maybe some change to this function right here, if I need to go and update my test, I want to be able to find it very easily inside of this file right here. And so even though this is a ridiculously long name, it does at least mean that if I make some change to this function in the future, I can copy the name, flip over to the test file, and then do a search in this file for new deck from file. And I've got, I think I made a mistake, new deck test from file. Okay, new deck from file, my mistake. There we go. And so now I can very easily do the search and find all the tests related to this particular function. Okay, so inside of here, let's get to it. Again, we want to delete any files with the name of deck testing, create the deck, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. So we'll first start off by calling os.remove to remove any dirty test files or any remnants of any crash tests that we ran in the past. So we'll call that deck testing. We'll then create a new deck. We'll then save this deck to the hard drive. So we'll call d.save to file. Let's make sure we got the right spelling there. Yep, save to file. And we're going to pass in the name of the file that we're going to create. And again, this is going to be underscore testing to make sure that we're always using the exact same name. So we'll say underscore deck testing. Next, we'll attempt to load this thing up from disk. So we'll say loaded deck. And you'll notice that at this point, we're kind of moving away from this one-letter terminology because there's not a super easy way to label this thing right here. We can call it D2, but that's just getting ridiculous. So I'm totally fine with the name of loaded deck. And this is going to come from new deck from file. And again, we're going to attempt to load this from the same file name of underscore deck testing. And then we'll write some actual assertion here to make sure that the deck was successfully loaded up. And so maybe for us, we'll just again assert that this thing has the correct length. I think that's totally appropriate. So we'll say that if the length of loaded deck is not equal to 16, then we need to show an error message. So we'll say t.error f expected 20 cards, 60, I don't know why I keep on doing 20 cards, I apologize. Expecting 16 cards in deck, got %v, and we'll say the length of loaded deck, like so. And then as the very last step, we're going to make sure that we clean up the file after we have ran the entire test. So we'll say os.remove underscore deck testing. By the way, the underscore in here, there's really no particular reason for it. Underscore deck testing, just make sure that it's very clear, like, hey, this is a temporary file. Hopefully nobody makes some important file called underscore deck testing. Now I do have an error right here, so let's see what's going on. Undefined D, okay, so I very clearly made a mistake here. I called the variable deck and then referred to it as D. Sorry, talking and typing sometimes is just more challenging than you would think. So I'm going to save now, and it looks like I don't have any errors. So let's flip on over to the terminal and run our test and see how we're doing. So we'll run go test, and everything still passes. So that's looking pretty good. Now, as usual, we always want to make some change to our test here to really make sure that it at least fails one time. We make sure that it fails one time just to ensure that we are not passing because of some fluke or something like that. So I'm going to change 16 to 160. So obviously this one should fail at this point. So we'll run go test, and yep, it looks like we got the failure. And so I've got a reasonable suspicion or a reasonable feeling that, yeah, this test is working the way I expect. Okay, so that is it for our cards project. We have covered a tremendous amount, so much. But at this point, there's still a lot of stuff for us to figure out about Go. So let's take a quick break. We're going to come back in the next section, and we're going to do a quick review on this project that we just finished, and then we'll move on to our next big topic. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.